Mr. President, you told me during one of the debates that you would bring back waterboarding and a hell of a lot worse.
I would do what I would do. I want to keep our country safe.
Today, and I thought we were only supposed to be war criminals towards our enemies news.
I really want you to pay attention to this video. ICE is detaining U.S. green card holders and torturing them.
You heard that right, folks. Donald Trump's Gestapo stopped a German man with a green card and violently interrogated him as he attempted to return to his home in Rhode Island, where he's a permanent resident. And this breaking story is so harrowing and disturbing that it actually has Berlin checking if U.S. immigration policy has changed, as this man is the third German to be detained, as Trump wages this sickening war on personal liberties that only gets worse the more you look into it. So let's break down the heart-wrenching and egregious tale of Fabian Schmidt. And if you'd like to support our work in trying to stop this country turning into a third world nation, authoritarian fascio state, then please consider dropping a like and subscribing, because I've seen far too little coverage of this story on the mainstream media.
A U.S. green card holder, this guy right here, was recently detained by ICE and violently interrogated inside of a U.S. airport. Schmidt had been out of the country, visiting Luxembourg, and when he came back, his partner, after a couple of hours, actually called the authorities because she was unable to find him at the airport she had went to pick him up at. According to his mother, the story that authorities gave was that his green card had been flagged, and after going several days without hearing from him, was notified that he had been hospitalized. And the reasoning for this is because he was tortured. He was described as being violently interrogated at Logan Airport for hours and being stripped naked, put in a cold shower by two officials, and being put back onto a chair.
Yeah, Donald Trump's border agents are Guantanamo-baying permanent residents of the United States and treating them like terrorist hostages for simply trying to return to their own home.
On top of that, he was placed on a mat in a bright room with other people at the airport with little food or water, suffered sleep deprivation, and was denied access to his medication for anxiety and depression. According to Schmidt, he was being pressured by immigration agents to give up his green card. This was all very traumatizing and ultimately very confusing for Schmidt and his family, as they noted that he has a recently renewed green card and no active issues in court. What that means is that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement picked a green card holder, held him in a facility with little food and water, and ran him under cold water naked to attempt to get him to give up his green card. They were torturing him so that he would give it up. This happening at the same time that DHS agents are raiding dorms of U.S. universities and even detaining and abducting pro-Palestine advocates. Now, this isn't violence that's occurring out of nowhere or in a vacuum, right? A lot of this is happening as a result of directives coming out of the Trump administration, and ICE and DHS, even before the Trump administration, were notable for the amount of violence that they were levying, particularly against immigrant communities in the country. But what we're seeing here is an evolution from immigrants to so-called subversives, to just green card holders generally, people who are minding their own business and having the audacity to travel. It's really important that you notice that trend and understand its implications, because these sorts of crackdowns and this sort of violence is not going to end with those communities. A threat to one of us is a threat to all of us, and this sort of violence does not end at trans people, at immigrants, at pro-Palestine organizers, at random green card holders at the Logan Airport. This sort of violence expands and encapsulates more and more communities until we are all under a boot. If they can do this to him, they can do this to you.
And that reporting was courtesy of James Gets Political on TikTok, but he is very much right. Even in this very own story, we see direct examples of the dire warning he just made. A German government spokesperson told Euronews it was aware of this case and those of two other German citizens who were detained while attempting to enter the US and who have subsequently returned to Germany, saying that they've recently become aware of 3 cases in which German citizens were unable to enter the USA and were detained for deportation when they entered the country, with 2 of the 3 cases having been resolved, and that the German government was monitoring the situation and liaising with other EU countries to assess if these were isolated cases or representative of, quote, a change in American immigration policy. And the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service told the U.S. media that the claims about his case were blatantly false, without saying which points it disputed. With the German Foreign Ministry having to clarify, quote, it is clear that we expect from our partners, as well as from all other countries in the world, that prison conditions comply with international human rights standards and that detainees are treated accordingly. And setting aside the abhorrent conditions he had to suffer, the fact that that man was treated as a prisoner in and of itself is emblematic of a deeper issue. In another story, you have The Guardian reporting Trump waging, quote, a sickening psychological war according to the lawyer of deported Venezuelans, saying of this story, in my 15 years of representing people in removal proceedings in the United States, this is the most shocking thing that I've ever seen happen to one of our clients. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt accused the deported detainees, over 200 of them, who now face at least a year inside Salvadorian jail, of being, quote, heinous monsters, who were part of, quote, one of the most violent and ruthless terrorist gangs on planet Earth. But the lawyer rejected that portrayal of one of her clients, calling claims that he was involved in the gang completely baseless. In fact, she said, he was an LGBTQ plus artist who had fled political persecution in an increasingly repressive Venezuela and crossed into the US from the Mexican border city of Tijuana last year, where he passed a credible fear interview used by asylum officers to determine whether asylum seekers have reasonable grounds to request protection in the US. And colleagues who had spent time with the Venezuelan man in detention described him as, quote, a very sweet and normal guy with no criminal history. With the lawyer adding that he appeared to have been wrongly identified as a gang member by immigration enforcement officials as a result of, quote, some benign tattoos that are not gang related. When we are rounding up, detaining, and torturing U.S. permanent residents, as well as blatantly labeling people gang members for no other reason than tattoos, or perhaps because they are LGBTQ plus affiliated, we have completely lost the plot of what this country is supposed to represent and the liberties it's supposed to stand for. And just like James said, if they can come for these people without due process, without justice, on a whim, and treat them in despicable ways like this, there's very little stopping them from doing the exact same thing to anyone else. And I couldn't think of a better way to cap this off than with this person's comment. The fact that they treat PDF files better than innocent people who just happen to be born somewhere else is disgusting. I'm so ashamed and disgusted of my country. And to that, all I can say is fucking same. Thank you for watching. Please help us get the word out about this story and about the utterly deplorable things this administration is doing. Because if we don't call it out and fight back, then we are complicit. If I have any updates on this story, I'll be sure to let you guys know in the description or the comments if there's a GoFundMe or anything, so definitely check that out. And for Really American, I'm Kenny Hesse. I'll see you guys in the next one.
President Trump drew sharp criticism across the aisle after he left open the possibility that he would support enhanced interrogation techniques such as waterboarding. In President Trump's first interview on ABC News, he said he believed that waterboarding and other forms of torture are effective.
Mr. President, you told me during one of the debates that you would bring back waterboarding and a hell of a lot worse.
I would do what I would do. I want to keep our country safe. I want to keep our country safe.
What does that mean?
When they're shooting, when they're chopping off the heads of our people and other people, when they're chopping off the heads of people because they happen to be a Christian in the Middle East, when ISIS is doing things that nobody has ever heard of since medieval times, would I feel strongly about waterboarding? As far as I'm concerned, we have to fight fire with fire now.
As far as I'm concerned, we have to fight fire with fire now.